maybe you could give us like the 2-minute overview of sort of your view of what it means to deliver effectively.
I guess in terms of actually delivering working software for companies, be it small sort of single instance web apps to massive platforms. I think what delivery actually means to me is doing it well. And when you actually the history I've got is sort of in things like test-driven development and automation. And when I actually sit down and I look at agile and test-driven development and all these things, and now DevOps, most of it comes down to removing uncertainty. And when you remove uncertainty, what you're trying to say is that as a sort of independent unit within the business, be that myself as a developer or myself as part of a team or that team as part of a business function, is that we can give complete clarity in terms of what we are delivering to give a very much a red light, green light indication as to whether it works. And the definition of it works is obviously flexible, and probably talk more about that later. But in terms of being able to actually say yes, it does completely work, or no, it doesn't completely work, is ultimately what all of these things are trying to get down to. And part of that is to remove that uncertainty from the whole chain, the delivery chain.
I think a lot of people that are working on some of these methodologies are looking at it as a way to speed things up, right? To be faster at doing something, right? And what I hear you saying is, it's maybe more around clarity and certainty about what it is that you're doing, right?
When I look at what DevOps is in general, you think about handoffs and flow and how things go to achieve quality. The definition of done is fundamentally what's the definition of quality. So I'd like to see what you think about this. I would almost say that I wanted to write this Pete for a long time that said DevOps is dead. Actually, I think it's become more DevOps is extremely bastardized or misunderstood.
It's interesting because I've always, obviously, like you say, everybody's got their own opinion on what DevOps is, just like everybody had their own opinion on what Agile is. And, and I think these are great frameworks for improving it, because ultimately what they come down to is a language. And the idea behind a language is that you encapsulate a whole load of meaning underneath one word, and then that makes it easier to communicate. Otherwise, you're talking about nuts and bolts when you need to be talking about the car and the roads. I think where we've got to as a company is our appreciation of you have to find your own way, and that every team is different and that every situation is different, and what works in one situation and context won't necessarily work in the other, which is why things like DevOps and Agile can be a little bit worrying sometimes, because it's just a cookie cutter approach. Here's your DevOps, here's your Agile, boom, sorted. And of course that's great for selling stuff, but does it actually get to the root cause, the thing that we're all trying to achieve, which is basically better business? I mean, this is for we're talking about here about developing software for some sort of business, 99% of the time.
Pete, do you see that from is that a regional or cultural or background or just sort of level of sophistication? I mean, assuming you're going out to CIO conferences, you're talking to other people, I'm assuming that you're seeing some of this at least at a global scale. I'm curious as to how you see different areas adopting these ideas at different levels.
I can't really see any. To be honest, the only thing I can see that's consistent is confusion amongst it. I see. Obviously, we're still a fairly small company. So, if we were like a few hundred people and we were more integrated in bigger things, I might be able to give you a more clear answer. But most of my knowledge comes from the few clients that we've got, but also a lot of the online stuff that I've been doing, the conversation that I've been having, and the only thing that I can get is that nobody can really agree on anything.
It's like the individual is somehow lost in this process, right?
Yeah.
And I know you've spoken or written about, right, sort of optimizing around the individual, right, as opposed to the team and these sorts of things. But how does that play into it? Because I mean, I certainly don't see anyone anywhere I go talking about we're gonna optimize for this process for the individual.
Really, what you need is to do good work. You need a comfortable, clear environment with some sort of level of automation around you, so that you're literally just thinking almost like in a linear fashion, but you can think in multiple levels, but it has to just be in one sphere of information. So writing code in a TDD environment is a perfect example, because you can keep running code and you can leave behind past information, but you know that what you're doing, the journey you're taking, is completely up to date. You know, you've removed all past certainty, and you get this really nice effect of just slowly building on top with clear information. And it's my thought that if everybody was to work in that way, that you would reach a state of flow, and a state of flow is the optimal being. That, and if everybody came together and was working in a state of flow, that you would have for most of the time, you would have a hyper performant team.
But I mean, we don't always know what the best path to a thing is, and that's a point where I think we have to kind of come together and figure those bits out, right? But then once we agree that this is the direction which we're headed, again, I think this whole idea of a laminar flow of ideas, how do we do it with, reducing turbulence, right? How do we go straight ahead all together? I think that's a great idea.
You're not going to learn how to do DevOps if you only think about if you think about software. I would argue that if you want to do DevOps really well, go understand manufacturing engineering, go look at the basis of systems design, and go to the bit of the history and understand how physical goods are manufactured, handoffs are made, handoffs are reduced, how they're optimized. And if you understand that, and this is why I go back to DevOps, is you can do DevOps without automation. If you understand your flow, exactly what you're talking about, and you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, because you want to achieve this outcome organizationally to produce software as a product, then you are getting down to the roots of what DevOps is. And then this confusing talk around DevOps when it comes to CI/CD pipelines and Kubernetes containers, container orchestration, all that other kind of stuff.
This is a thing where you're headed with this, what you are trying to get CIOs to change, their behaviors, or to change the way they interact with the teams. I think one of my concerns might be that they don't care about this stuff. My question is, do they even see a problem to begin with? And how do you go about convincing them otherwise?
What I usually do is try and start, with an honest story about my story, our story, about where we were and where we sort of got to, and, I guess the conclusion that we've arrived to as a business. And I guess we are looking for a narrowed down version of a type of customer that we deal with, and someone who has seen the sort of problems and really wants better performance. All I can say is that I think that the higher the management, the more interested in the basics they are about things like time and cost. Because when you're at that level of an organization, you really have very few levers that you can pull. I think someone at that level has increase cost, decrease cost, hire, fire. And there's not much they can do. So I think if you can talk to them in terms of like time, scheduling, and resources.
What's the takeaway on DevOps for those watching?
I think that the two things. So the first point would really be if you want, if you're evaluating DevOps, whoever you talk to, just make sure that the first language they speak is common sense, and that common sense, that they have experience, those two things together are really what a professional should be doing, is talking common sense, and they have the experience to base that common sense on. Although that sounds counterintuitive, the experience sometimes helps you understand the mistakes, so therefore you can come to a resolution about what actually, is the reality. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, is you've just got to find what works for you. And you're not going to find the same problem the same way. You're going to find the same problem in different scenarios inside the same problem. And, really, you just got to find what works for you. And part of that is having a lot of humility about failure. And that if you've made a mistake, or if anybody else made a mistake, that isn't game over for them, that everyone makes mistakes. And that, in order to find what works for you, you're going to have to break a few eggs.
Incredible buzzword that's out there, right? And I think this was a really good conversation about, what does it actually mean, right? So I think it was really good stuff. I really appreciate it. So
thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, listen, thanks Bill Bensing, thanks Phil Yanoff, thanks Pete Hurd. I'm Chris Lockhart. This was Consultants Saying Things. We'll see everybody next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, great.